And maybe you have some other questions you think we should ask Sessions, but I think Trump should ask at least these questions. The first question is, when did the surveillance, counterintelligence surveillance of Carter Trump and the Trump campaign start? What was the criminal predicate for them starting this investigation? Well, before I continue with the rest of my questions, I want to explain the context of this monologue, which is right now we have an Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who is AWOL. He's not focused on any of the things that are going on. He's not focused on the fact that the government was used to interfere with the campaign and then later to interfere with the president's effectiveness. And that's a total perversion of the judicial system and will ruin our country. So the question is, why is it that Jeff Sessions is AWOL? Why is he not interested in this or paying any attention to it or care about it or say or do anything about it? There's two possibilities. One is he hasn't thought about it. He hasn't considered it. His mind is not focused on any of the facts. And that's where Socratic interviewing comes in very well. When somebody is not focused on facts, one way you can get them to think about a problem in a different way, from a different light, is to ask them the questions that force them to think. It's very different than arguing with them. They don't have to pay attention to the argument because they don't have to answer it. But the question is a simple question. And the other reason to consider this alternative as opposed to the other ones that I have suggested, which are more active, this one is more moderate and let's call it a softball strategy, is that with this kind of approach, you are not accused of interfering with an investigation. So when you have just sessions over, you either record everything, you have witnesses, so it's clear that you're not telling him to do anything. You just want to know what's going on. And you just ask the questions. In the guise of trying to find out what's going on, you require him to think, to engage. And I think there's a high probability that the explanation for Jeff Sessions not participating or not stopping all this perversion of justice that's going on under his nose is because he's not aware of it. He's not aware of it because he's not thinking about it, because nobody asked him the questions that require him to engage and think about it. So the other possibility is he is aware of it and doesn't care. That's a more perverse perspective. It's also possible, but I think less likely. I think he recused himself, he doesn't want to know about it. Anyway, he's not recused about illegality in the Justice Department. He never recused himself on that. And so Trump could certainly ask him these questions. Now, besides the first two questions that I suggested, when did the surveillance start? What was there a criminal predicate? What was the basis for it? And you could ask him, why hasn't the DOJ handed over the FISA applications, 4 of them, without any redaction, so that those people with security clearance in the Congress can take a look at them and see what they say, instead of getting briefings from the Justice Department on what they say. No, they can see for themselves. And obviously, this is a important question because Rosenstein, you can ask him this question. Did Rosenstein file one of these applications? Did the application contain false and unverified information that was collected by Christopher Steele, a British spy that was paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC through a law firm that hired GPS, which specializes in smearing opponents? Did that happen or it didn't happen? Just ask him. And if Rosenstein signed it, shouldn't he recuse himself? Because isn't he a participant? Ask him whether he thinks that Rosenstein should recuse himself if he actually did that. So maybe Sessions hasn't considered whether Rosenstein has done these things or even focused on what's in the application, the FISA application. Now, it turns out he can also ask, did the FISA application reveal that Richard Steele got Russian sources, in other words, communicated with the Russians, colluded with the Russians to create this false and unverified information? Did McCabe say that without that FISA application, without that dossier that was compiled by Christopher Steele, there would have been no FISA application, no warrant would have been issued? That was the main basis for the issuance of the FISA application. He can ask Sessions, did the DOJ inform the FISA court judge that Hillary Clinton and the DNC had paid for this dossier? Isn't that relevant to the validity of it? So there are many questions that he can ask about these FISA applications. Those are some of them. And I think probably Sessions hasn't really focused on any of these facts. The other thing is he can ask him, do you think I should declassify the FISA application so the whole country can see for themselves and make their own judgments about whether it was based on actual facts or whether it was based on unverified and false information, like I've said before? You can get Sessions to think about facts, not order him. And that means that you're not interfering with the investigation. You just want to know what's going on. And that would force Sessions to think about the issues that you want him to think about. You could ask him about Christopher Steele. Did the DOJ or FBI hire Christopher Steele to work for them? Did they fire him because they determined he was a liar? Did he leak information to the press and that's why they fired him against his promise not to? Have any of the people that have been leaked to the press regarding the Trump investigation or the Hillary Clinton cover-up, all the leaks from the Department of Justice that were in the IG report, have any of them been prosecuted? Why is Manafort being prosecuted when what they're alleging there happened 12 years before Trump got elected? What does that have to do with anything of Russian collusion or obstruction of justice? I would ask him all these questions and get him to think about it. And say, when he doesn't know the answer, say, well, can you find out and let me know? These are some of the things that I would ask him. You could ask him about Comey. Did Comey leak to the press classified information? Well, apparently he said in a hearing that his whole purpose was he leaked it to a friend who leaked it to the press. The purpose was to get a special counsel named. So he admitted that he leaked. You can ask Sessions about something that he has not recused himself, which is, did Hillary Clinton delete 30,000 emails after she was subpoenaed to hand them over? Did Hillary Clinton, and this is in the IG report, did Hillary Clinton set up a private server to avoid having to have a record that was open to the public so that she could keep all her transactions secret? Was her private server hacked? Well, we know from the IG report that it was hacked. And isn't that gross negligence under the law? Reckless disregard of classified information, which in this case, there was not only reckless disregard, there was not only gross negligence, but it had a consequence. At least one foreign government or more were able to hack into her private server, which did not have the security that a government server does. And this whole issue about foreign governments finding out about what's going on and how horrible that is and affecting our elections, well, Hillary Clinton did it. So if all these things are true, why isn't she being prosecuted? There's other things in this IG report where they say there was bias, but it didn't affect the actions of the DOJ. Well, did the DOJ change the language of Comey's report and change it from gross negligence was a crime to reckless disregard or recklessness or gross recklessness? They just used a different word to mean the same thing to avoid the language in the statute. Were his rights violated by being subjected to surveillance when there was no criminal predicate? In other words, that's a violation of 242 code where you're not supposed to, you cannot use your authority in the government to violate somebody's rights. Carter Page's rights were violated. What was the purpose of the surveillance of Carter Page? Was it to get a camera in there so they could get information about what other people in the campaign said and then leak it to the press to smear the Trump campaign or to affect his presidency? Was that the purpose? If the purpose was, as they say, that it was to get, they were worried that the Russians were colluding with Carter Page and that he would then affect the elections by influencing Trump. Well, why didn't they just communicate with Trump and warn him of this risk? If he wasn't colluding, he would say, well, thank you. I'll keep an eye on Carter Page, or maybe I'll even fire him. If he was colluding, then he would stop because he'd say, oh my God, they're onto me. So in any event, they would have stopped the effect of the Russians on the campaign or on the presidency, whichever they're claiming that they wanted to stop. But they didn't do that. Why? Because the real reason is they were trying to get something on Trump. They wanted to nail him on some crime that later they could use in articles of impeachment. Or at the bare minimum, if they failed at that, to keep this investigation of Trump, this witch hunt, in the headlines, to discredit him, to put him under pressure, to incapacitate him, to emasculate him in the exercise of his presidential powers and policy. It's all about the fact that they hate him and hate his policies. And that's a partisan perspective that should not be in the DOJ. The IG report has many examples of bias, but then it comes to the ridiculous conclusion that this bias, there is no evidence that this bias actually affected their decision making. Well, there's plenty of evidence that in the report that it did. I just gave a couple of examples. So that's what's going on, and those are some of the questions I would ask. Why don't you tell me what questions you would ask and how the Socratic interviewing technique that I use in my interviews could be used by Trump